board members, again, this is your opportunity to provide any input or thinking about the information that staff is presenting to us. And again, this is part 2 of tonight's work session on professional development assessment and evaluation. I very much appreciate the time that Marty and staff gave Ms. Kovacs and I on Friday. It was hopefully a way to make this evening's presentation maybe a little more streamlined in terms of how you can help set the stage for the board's understanding of what you're undertaking. And because I know we drilled down a lot, and the reality is this is kind of an initial stage that you're going through. So I'm going to turn it over to, I guess, Dr. Brabrand first, since I saw the nod over there, and then you guys take it from there.
It is 8:45. We have a one-pager, we have a presentation, and we'll do what the board's pleasure is. But I'm gonna use the spirit of these conclusions. I want to read the conclusions and then give you my nugget, and then you guys can decide how much more you want. The first conclusion says, our central office resources are currently deployed primarily towards providing PD with only loose infrastructure to coordinate, align, and monitor the PD and its effectiveness. Folks, this is the same shared accountability theme that you just heard from the last one. We have some of the best PD, right? Think like going to Baskin and Robbins. What do they have, 31 or 33 flavors? Which is it? Is it 31? Baskin and Robbins has been in business a long time. You can go and get 31 flavors of ice cream. We have some of the best PD, and we have more than 31 flavors of it. We've got to figure out the PD that drives achievement towards our strategic plan, and then focus on making sure all of our schools, all of our school leaders, and all of our central office support staff are getting that PD. That might be vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry, which are the 3 favorite flavors, right? It might actually mean butter pecan, strawberry shortcake, and thin mint. But we've got to decide. We've traditionally been set up as an ice cream shop with 31 flavors of PD. And we've got to get to a place where we're going to offer, monitor, and follow up to ensure fidelity of implementation of that PD in about 3 to 5, maybe 6 flavors. That doesn't mean somebody else at a school could sell Thin Mint and do a Thin Mint activity that is school-based, specific to that school's needs. But the division is going to focus its resources and support staff and monitoring on the 5 to 6 ice cream flavors that are going to drive us closer to realizing the strategic plan. That's my way of taking the one-pager into a few sentences. I know there's a lot more and a lot work there, and we can talk more. But you can see in like figure B and C on the one-pager. B is optimal strategic PD system functioning, where everything is aligned to organizational goals. And figure C is current FCPS PD functioning, where there's school goals, the organizational infrastructure is loose, and the organizational goals aren't tightly wrapped around PD. So that's what our challenge is. I'm just being a straight shooter. We need to get our PD more strategically aligned. We're going to have to reduce PD from 33 things to 3 or 4. And do a better job monitoring and implementing that PD and seeing what the return is. Because obviously, if you're doing these best practices like EL, we should see improvement in how our EL learners learn. All right, I think that's my shot at it, and then I'll see. I don't want to dismiss all the work that these folks have done and for being here this evening, but that's my take.
Yeah, so Dr. Brabrand did a great job of setting this up, and this is another collaboration between ORSI and one of our offices, the Office of Professional Learning and Family Engagement. They've been working on going down the same path on 2 different tracks for a little over a year now. So ORSI is focused on the evaluation aspect of our PD infrastructure in Fairfax County, while at the same time the Office of Professional Learning and Family Engagement, they've been working on a needs assessment. And so when you look at those through two different lenses, ORC has really been focused on the structures around professional development, not really focusing on the quality of those experiences, but looking at how well we are established and set up for professional development in Fairfax County, which lends you to some of the models that you see here. The Office of Professional Learning and Family Engagement is really looking at the needs of our employees around the kinds of professional development that they are looking for, that they might need to better themselves as professionals, and then also looking into the best delivery models for that professional development. And as we take a look at both of those sides of the equation, we'll be able to work more closely together as a team to actually implement one of the recommendations to develop a larger working group to really identify what looks best for Fairfax County Public Schools as it relates to professional development. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lydia Haruta, who will walk us through the evaluation. Tonight, you will not hear about the needs assessment. OPLFE are still working on pulling together that information, and we will be bringing that to the board at another time. But they are here to answer any questions that you might have about overall professional development in the county. And as Dr. Brabrand did say, the current state of our structure for PD really speaks to our culture around professional development and really doesn't speak to the high quality PD that we provide our employees, those high quality experiences, or the work that is currently coming out of Kathleen's office.
So as Marty was saying, at the heart of this study is a look at what the school division needs to have in place in order for our professional development to be strategic. And as Dr. Brabrand said, what do we need to have in place in order to achieve the goals that are in Ignite? Another foundational piece of this was also a look at both the operational side and the instructional side in terms of professional development for all staff. And that also came out of the strategic plan and the goal that's mentioned in Premier Workforce. So I'm going to quickly go through the different parts in terms of findings, study conclusions, and then recommendations. And I'm going to start with the figures that Dr. Brabrand was mentioning. So when you look at figure B, and you're looking at that optimal strategic professional development system, you'll see that there are three different things that are highlighted here. One is around cultural norms and having them be consistent. Another is around the organizational structure and having that be robust. And then within that, the experiences happen and they all are directed towards an organization, towards organizational goals or agreed upon organizational goals, those 7 flavors as opposed to the 31 flavors. So that's kind of the ideal. And I'm going to talk about this in terms of standards. So when we went looking for what is it that a school division should do in order to be strategic in this way and provide professional development for both operational and instructional staff, what we found is that there are some new directions that school divisions are taking in terms of being robust and providing it for all staff, as well as trying to hit strategic outcomes with it. But there wasn't necessarily a benchmark that we could look at, so we went and developed a set of 12 standards that are based on the research that's out there. And so I'm just going to ask if we can go to slide 9 of the presentation, and I'm just going to give you a flavor of what some of these standards are. So if you look at slide 9, these are the 3 different standards that go with cultural norms. And you'll see that one of the standards, for example, is that leadership advocates for professional development. So that would be one of the kinds of things that you would look for in a strategic professional development system. Then moving on to slide 10, for the organizational structures, infrastructure, what you would look for are for things that align. So if you look at 2.2, the experiences align with the shared commitments that the organization has made. And then moving on to the slide 11 that talks about what gets you the quality professional development experiences. You can see the very last one on there talks about how when people go to these experiences that they are told and they understand how what they're learning and what their experience is ties back to the organizational goals. So that's just a flavor of the kinds of standards. There's 12 of them altogether, but that those standards working together as a set allow an organization to be able to have a strategic professional development system. So going back to the one-pager and to Figure C, as Dr. Brabrand said, this is kind of an ugly slide. This is where we are right now. Okay, you can go to slide 15 actually, and it's on there. Thank you, Marty. So if you look at this kind of ugly slide, FCPS is really in the early phases of addressing those 12 standards in those 3 different areas. And what we found is that there is that looseness of the organizational structure. There is inconsistency in terms of the cultural norms, and the experiences themselves sometimes go to all different kinds of goals and not necessarily that shared set of 7 ice cream flavors that's being aimed at. So now I'm going to ask if you can go to slide 22, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the resources that FCPS is investing in professional development. And you'll see on this slide that the total resources that we could account for, and this was using a framework developed by Alan Auden, who has developed a way for school divisions to look at the resources they put into their professional development, that in total $55.8 million is being invested or was invested in 2016 by FCPS in professional development. Now, the biggest chunk of that was $28 million for the staff development and school planning days. It was about $7 million per day when we set those days aside for instructional staff to participate in professional development. But you'll also see there's about $20 million there for programs that support professional development activities, things like the instructional coaching program and other kinds of things that are basically dedicated to professional development in the school system. There's also approximately $7 million that's spent on local and non-local travel, so people going outside the school division to get professional development. And then lastly, about $500,000 that's spent on the software to help run MyPLT and support our professional development. So in total, it comes out to about $55.8 million, and that represents about 2.2% of our budget. That is actually on the low side of what organizations tend to devote to professional development when they have that as the focus. In general, organizations, whether school divisions or outside for-profit companies, tend to devote somewhere in the area of 4 to 7%. So we're on quite the low side by devoting 2.2% of our operational budget. Then moving on to slide 23, some of the interest here was in looking to see how equitably we're applying those resources to operational versus instructional staff. And you'll see here that instructional staff get about 13 times as many resources invested in them as operational staff. And while even if you take out that $28 million for the days that the instructional staff are getting PD at schools, it's still a considerably larger amount that's being invested per instructional staff member. So moving on to the conclusions of the study, basically FCPS's current resources are deployed really towards providing the experiences and not deployed towards aligning those resources or coordinating them or ensuring that they're strategic. So right now, we do have a lot of quality professional development happening, but it's not necessarily deployed in a way that will lead to strategic outcomes. And furthermore, turning FCPS's PD approach into that kind of strategic or aligned system would require a cultural shift. You saw in kind of that ugly diagram a lot of different players in there. You had region goals, you had school goals, you had department goals. You have a lot of different people and different units in the school division right now who are involved and providing this kind of professional development. And that kind of everyone kind of right now doing what their own thing and turning that into a system where it's aligned and moving towards just a couple strategic goals would be a cultural shift for FCPS. The other thing with professional development is that while we're not necessarily talking new resources, it may be repurposed resources, and that's not, we're not the ones deciding that. We're just saying it could be either way. It would require really reshaping FCPS's PD system through new infrastructure, and we think that would take about 3 to 5 years to accomplish. Staff in general lack clarity with all those different players of departments, regions, schools, central office, all these different players in it. There's a lack of clarity about who has authority or control over professional development. And Dr. Brabrand mentioned that. You're hearing that same kind of theme as when we were talking about English language learners. And then lastly, equitable professional development for operational staff will require considerable resources and adjustments. That 13-to-1 difference may be the right thing to do, but there may need to be a look taken at whether that's how the resources should be put into instructional versus operational staff. So in terms of recommendations, there are 4 main ones. The first one is probably the big one, and that's we recommend to the superintendent that he establish a work group, and that the work group include representatives from all instructional and operational departments, and that work group work to submit 3 specific things. The first thing is an action plan for development and implementation of a strategic PD system, and that should be focused around meeting those 12 standards that are listed, because those 12 standards should get you the strategic professional development. The second thing is to provide recommendations for an agreed upon authority structure and responsibilities for the various units that are right now involved in professional development, especially OPLFE, schools, regions, and central office. And then the third thing would be to provide recommendations to equitably balance professional development for both instructional and operational staff in support of Ignite's goals. So if the overall intent is to support Ignite's goals, the equity should come from a drive towards those goals. The second recommendation is to request an alignment study of the goals and desired outcomes in Ignite with the professional development offerings currently available and needed to meet those strategic goals and objectives. And let me talk a little bit about how that's different from the needs assessment. The needs assessment that OPLFE has conducted has really taken a look from the individual staff member viewpoint of what is it that staff feel they need and how would they like to receive it, as well as what they might need in order to accomplish things that are in the strategic plan. This alignment study is really taking the reverse perspective of what does the organization need to accomplish the strategic plan, and then how do our current offerings align with that? The fourth recommendation is to direct staff to develop a data-driven approach for gauging professional development's functioning and performance that would allow FCPS to engage in continuous improvement practices for PD. And here, the idea is really to make sure that there's a way that those outcomes of this professional development and of the system that's in place and the offerings that are in place can be measured and can be seen in the organization. And then lastly, to ensure that the professional development days allocated for school-based staff target strategic aims. And with that, I will turn it.
Well, thank you for that very concise overview. At this point, I have gotten a signal from almost all of our colleagues that you'd like to ask some questions and provide input. So we'll begin with Ms. Schultz, followed by Ms. Karen Keys-Gamaro.
Can we go back maybe, I think it's back two slides. Stop. You put down the slide number, I didn't put down the slide. So the one where it says that you're at well, it does say the crossroads. I was trying to get words that you're saying plus words off the screen. The end is that why do we have to do a study? And it was the study about the Ignite. I'm trying to discern the difference between kind of assessing where we are and being sort of hamstrung or cobbled by the need to endlessly study. Like, we could study how we study things. And is there not enough sort of institutional knowledge and ability to take the pulse to begin? I don't want to hamper this movement forward by another study. So is the intent that there's going to be a study on how we deliver the PD or how they gain access to it? Is that a barrier to moving forward?
I think you're referencing the alignment study that's meant. So the alignment study is not intended to take an enormous amount of time. It's intended to just take what's in the strategic plan and then match it up against what we're currently offering as a school division and make sure there aren't big holes in terms of what is needed by the organization in order to accomplish the strategic plan.
But you envision this being parallel to moving forward with any professional development, refinement, assistance. So we don't intend to not align until there's a study done. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think you do. Listen, this work. Let's just be honest. This work happened before I got here. You're hearing the recommendations. This is a recommendation to the superintendent, but we're sharing with the board. I'd like to go faster. I'm listening. We've had some robust discussions in LT. The bottom line is we have a little work to do with you all on Thursday. If we prioritize the strategic plan, we can better prioritize the PD that we're actually going to get ready to offer in support of that strategic plan.
I don't want to commit the sin that I'm fond of pointing out, which is I've heard teachers say, but the frustration, the pulse over 6 years, I think I can say, it's not that anecdotal. Is the frustration of what you described, that messy, well, the regions want this, and then there was, the competitive nature before regions clusters, and who was driving PD? Was it the principal? Was it the region? Was it central something or other? Whose voice mattered in the professional development of the individual being developed? And what I've learned from not only work here, but attending lots of different things out there, NSBA and beyond, is the more sort of colloquial the PD is to the person, to the teacher, if that's really what we're talking about, that's the main thing. If we're driving the dollars into the classroom, the person in the classroom knows what the challenges they're facing, and having that be teacher-led, the teacher-led professional development is by far the most professionally rewarding, the most academic success-oriented for the student in the classroom, and is frankly often the most effective in terms of the use of dollars. And it is hey, wouldn't it be great if we took a whitewater rafting trip for professional development? That's maybe not the best thing. That is maybe not the best thing. Maybe going to Canada isn't the best professional development. Maybe we can do professional development here and then, train the trainer. So, this, I would just say, of everything you said, is like, yep, I've got. And the second I hit here, I went, are we going to go study this some more when really, doing this, which is the pulse of the person, the local need, that doesn't require a lot of study.
So,
you know?
so one thing that we did, Ms. Schultz, is that we went down this road at the same time. So we could have done the evaluation, this initial evaluation first, and then engaged in a needs assessment. But we knew that to expedite this work, we wanted to do these two parts together. When we talk about the alignment study, that can all happen again at the same time so that it informs the work. We don't necessarily have to wait then for yet another study before moving forward. We can convene the work group. We can start thinking about the structures, trying to get this document or this graph to look more like the B graphic, and then really then assess our current practices, or not practices, but current offerings to make sure that they align with what our outcomes are for the system. And then that information.
That align with what our, it's the who's the our.
The R is
you know,
everyone
I-
at this table.
Okay.
That's the hour.
Well-
and it's as it relates to the strategic plan. So what are our outcomes in the strategic plan, and are the offerings going to get us there? And that will help
I'm going to
inform
tell you
the work.
fundamentally, we all talk about strategic plan. When I go out there, they don't know what strategic plan is. We say, yeah, they're like, yeah, that's something that you guys do. Like the correlation of, you know, a teacher, you know, whether it's a geosystems teacher in high school or a, you know, a special education teacher in elementary, they're, you know, we're on two different planes, and I don't want to be, you know, you and I are like members of the brass tacks club.
You're
I'm
right.
like in the more brass tacks here. of
You're
this.
exactly right.
Okay.
They know the work, but they don't know how it's aligned to the plan. They know the work, and so if you say, are you doing X, Y, or Z? Oh yeah, I know what that is. But when you say ignite or strategic plan, they don't see the connection there.
Just this gives me pause because I fear when I hear, you know, how we are going to align our alignment. That starts the disconnect again with being centrally driven versus, you know, the organically teacher led. So that's I'm going to leave it at a big takeaway. That's my big takeaway is,
I think the strongest PD is some combination of some PD that's division directed and some that's job embedded. What's the right combination? Our strategic plan has 200 actions. We've done PD around 200 things. And some people have had the PDs. 3 people have had Thin Mint. 3 people have had Butter Pecan. What is stuff that we want to be sure everyone's had PD on?
Actually, I'm going to say, I've got an analogy that's even simpler than that. I think that some people out there are doing a barbecue. Some people out there are having popcorn night. Some people are out there making cookie dough. And some people are having, you know, ice cream sundae bar. The question is, you know what, this year or the next 18 to 24 months, let's do ice cream bar. Now, you can guide, you know, the individualization of the, you know, of how you're going to do and what you're going to do in the general area of what you're going to do, but we're all kind of get the oars going in the same direction instead of, you know, look, we don't know who's doing to what. Right. So paring down the areas of choice so that there is some division, there's a general strategic direction of where the next series of PD is going to come from, but the framework is not up here directed. It's, you know.
No, it's the joint accountability. We've overwhelmed our instructional folks. We've underwhelmed our operational and support folks. As you can see, they don't have enough PD. So we've got to rebalance. We've got to reprioritize. It's much the same work that we're talking about with the strategic plan. The good news is, remember, I wasn't here a year ago when the study started. They've come to some of the same conclusions. It's just now about how fast we can get there. And here's the other reality I don't mind sharing. I just had a 4:00 meeting before this meeting, but you know, we have meetings on the reports, and I've had Francisco, Kathleen, Lisa, we're all in an office. We're already working on the plan. So I'm not waiting for the study, even though some of that study will happen even from Thursday when we have more streamlined strategic plan, hopefully, that can help us.
And part of it has to be what's coming off their plate too.
Understood.
You know, not just what they need, but what we can pare back,
Understood.
What deadwood we can give.
Understood.
To allow the space for the professional development to fill what's left and to fill it effectively. Okay.
Excellent. All right, Ms. Schultz, you've covered what you wanted to cover. Thank you. I've got Ms. Karen Keys-Gamara, followed by Janie Strauss.
I'm going to try to just focus on some basic principles that I had concerns about, and the stars must be aligned because I thought study. We just need to put down, what the goal is, and then plan. The plan has to line up with the goal. I mean, maybe I don't have the full picture, but I have the same problem with the whole study issue. The other overall concern I have is I couldn't tell from what I read the extent to which the folks who are on the ground were included in the whole process of figuring this out. Thank you. I'm trying to get this in before I turn into a pumpkin. So that, I really have a huge concern, and the folks that I've talked to in my previous life coming in here, I've always heard the same thing, the same anecdotal stuff that Ms. Schultz was referring to, and that is this kind of top-down, you go do this, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to the folks who are doing the job on the ground. So one of my questions I would ask as you go forward is, are our internal resources being adequately used? We've got some amazing people, as I'm sure Dr. Brabrand talks about all the time. Somebody mentioned to me today, Sarah Thompson, the teacher of year who's doing the paperless classroom. How many folks want to learn from her? That's just an example. I'm not trying to say we need ice cream and pancakes. I'm just saying, these are the varieties of that we can provide. Don't start me thinking about food. But at any rate, so I am really concerned about that, really concerned about our staff being able to be a part of the planning process. I want them to be able to feel as though they can take ownership because they've helped to identify what those problems are. I don't think anybody knows better than they do. So I just want to make sure we're listening. So I think I asked number 2. The other question, overall arching concern I had was, does the process lend itself to isolation or team building? I think that some of these things, like you said, you may have people ice cream and pancakes in the same school, but there may be identified problems in that school that we need to focus on. And so I'm wondering if as we're evaluating, we need to, first of all, understand what the needs of that school are, and then make sure that our professional development is geared toward that. I think that's the same question. And the other thing is, I guess we're getting to the monitoring stage of whether we're being effective in what we're doing, because it seems...
So with this, we're just at the very beginning stages. So we've used this evaluation just to see where we are as a system with our professional development. And so we're just at that first part of, okay, we take this structure that we have, we see that it's a little more loose than we would like it to be. At the same time, we take the needs assessment that Kathleen Shop is working on, and then we bring all this information together to figure out what those next steps might look like. So we're not yet at the monitoring stage because we really haven't created anything that we would start implementing yet to monitor.
I think another important overall arching concern might be choice, so that people feel as though they're not just having something imposed upon them. So I think even within the same range of things that we're concerned about, it'd be nice to make sure that we're including that choice element. So those are my 3 major concerns.
And I'd just like to comment on the study, the alignment study. We have already started forming the work group so that we can move forward. We are going to involve stakeholders from across the division to be involved in this work group at different levels. We have started mapping out the process. So what might be the timeline? What are some of the deliverables? And, we certainly want to use the strategic plan to ensure that we have the system improvement in place as we start to develop out this comprehensive PD plan. But that work has already started.
And that's great. I guess the thing that I would say that I had a concern as I was reading is when you talk about, reaching out to the various stakeholders and et cetera, I think oftentimes we may rely heavily upon our principals. And I'm not sure that is always, that's a great voice, but it's not the only voice in that school. And I'd like to make sure that we're getting a broad base of sources from that particular school.
So in terms of the study, we actually surveyed throughout the school division, all staff. It was approximately half of staff in the school division for a survey that was included in the data that we looked at, and OPLFE actually used the other half of staff for their needs assessment. So pretty much all staff were represented in some of the data. We also conducted focus groups and interviews with various people as well. So we did try to get as much of a mix as possible and to understand how different staff members in different parts of the organization saw professional development, both in terms of what they were receiving, as well as in the case of some of the staff members who provides professional development or have to broker it for their own staff that they supervise, how they viewed it from that standpoint. So we did basically try to look at all staff members throughout the school division and get their perspectives into the study.
And that's the same for the needs assessment. We surveyed 4 different groups: instructional employees, including teachers and instructional assistants, instructional leaders, support employees, and support leaders.
Anything else?
Thank you. I forgot to end that. Sorry, that's my period. Thank you.
Yeah. No worries. Sometimes staff adds something and then it triggers another thought. So now I have next up Ms. Strauss, followed by Karen Corbett-Sanders.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that you've already started the work group because I think that will be critical. And what I'm hearing is we need to make sure that we have a tighter approach to this. Whatever we identify as our top objectives in Ignite, we need to make sure that we are focusing PD on that. But also that, as you've acknowledged, everybody else acknowledged, there's a balance. Teachers complained to us, they had to go to this thing centrally and it wasn't useful, it wasn't what they needed. So it's matching what we need and also matching what the overall needs of the school division are. And also recognizing that individual schools and individual PTAs will fund things that are specific to that school. And I don't think we're saying they can't do that, because that is very important to individual passions and ideas in a school. So it is a balance, but again, we need to make sure that what we see as our major objectives in Ignite are being met, and so that we're balancing. It's interesting that I suspect that what in your recommendations, your findings, wondering whether or not the very small amount of PD that is available operationally on the operations side of the house. I mean, we traditionally spend most of our time with our teachers and schools and principals and administrators. And I guess you observed that there is a very small amount for other people. And are you saying that we don't spend enough, or we just don't know?
We're saying that we basically don't know, and until the school division decides on their priorities and commitments and then can backtrack it to professional development, that won't be no.
Great. So the balance may be what it needs to be, and highlighting it was very interesting. So we'll wait to see whether or not that's a good thing, a bad thing. And I look forward to seeing what the work group comes out with. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Strauss. I have Ms. Karen Corbett-Sanders, followed by Ms. Evans. Mr. Moon, are you wanting to be added to the list? Oh, excellent. Okay. All right. So
I want
Karen?
to thank Ms. Strauss for teeing up some of the concerns that I had in how this has been presented. I think you guys have done yeoman's work in trying to unpack what is a bit like the Wild West of how we are doing professional development. I think it's really important for us to focus on what is the purpose of professional development, and that is to facilitate our commitment to lifelong learning amongst our professional and non-professional staff to meet the needs of this system and to promote student outcomes. And if we use that, and we always look at it as through the lens of how do we affect student outcomes, that should drive what our professional development agenda is or what our program is. And so along those lines, I'm a little bit concerned over the language on page 28, where we talk about the recommendation. It's right there behind you, the last bullet, recommendation to equitably balance professional development for both instructional and operational staff in support of FCPS goals. This really isn't about equitable allocation. It's what is the appropriate professional development to drive student outcomes for this system. So there may be a baseline of professional development that we need to ensure we get to every person who works for Fairfax County Public Schools. And if you look at it almost as a hierarchy of needs for professional development, the level of professional development that we need across the whole school system to ensure that we have that caring culture and that we have an understanding about what the norms are and what we want to achieve across the system. That might be something that every member of the staff needs to have. When I was with a Verizon, it was winning ways, and it was about professional development on the culture of that organization. Then you may go to the next level, which is what is the professional development that we need to affect for the people on our staff to ensure that they are the best that they can be in the jobs that they are performing. And that professional development is different depending on whether you're instructional or operational staff. And it may be a greater demand that you have to go outside of the resources of this organization to get them, or that it's more of a train the trainer, depending on what role you have. So I get a little concerned when we say it's an equitable balance, because it's really how do we ensure that the professional development that we are providing to our staff allows them to be the most effective in their jobs and to feel like they are continuing to grow in the role that they serve, or have the ability through professional development to transition to other roles. So, for example, in the instructional space, we may have certain levels that are for all elementary school teachers, all principals, all high school teachers, and then additional professional development may be focused on the niche in which somebody is serving. So it could be, math or whatever else. So that's where I would just caution that we don't focus too hard on the equitable balance piece. And then it actually seems to contradict the next bullet on page 29, where we talk about the alignment of the goals and the outcomes. And so I would just encourage that you're careful about that. I do think it's great that you have a work group that's going to take this to the next level. And that data-driven approach is the accountability piece. So I would hope that after using resources for professional development, there's some way of actually going back and measuring the effectiveness of it. And when we talk about professional development that is outside of the provision within the school system itself, so external vendors, for want of a better term, that we should have some sort of metric that says, how many people do we send to this conference? And is it more effective for us to send more people for professional development and then have them come back and train the trainer than trying to send one and extend the lifeline of how long it takes to train people? So I would just hope that as part of your work that you would also keep that in mind.
Okay, I have Ms. Evans followed by Ms. Derenak Kofax.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think a number of my colleagues have gone over some of the points I wanted to make. So I'll just say briefly, I am very glad to see us focusing in and being strategic on our professional development. That is something that I think most of us have heard over the years of teachers being concerned if they feel that the professional development they're getting isn't the one that they would have chosen if they were given a choice. So I hope we do. I'm glad to see we're going to be doing this strategically and hopefully getting the most bang for the buck. I was interested. You mentioned something about robust conversations in LT. Is that to suggest that there are folks who have concerns about the direction we're going in? If you can share a little bit,
I would say this is how I.
Sorry.
No. No, I know she's a reporter. I think my leadership style is to bring topics to a group and then ask for people's feedback and push people to push back. I don't want yes people surrounding me on leadership team. And when we have something like this, the discussion that you all are having sometimes very much parallels what we're having at LT. I actually take that as a positive because it says some of the same tensions exist. I wasn't here for 5 years, so I really don't have anything to compare it to, and I don't. But I feel like everybody in LT we're using the full 3 hours. These meetings are going long. People are grabbing for more time to put in insights, and I think that's going to make us an even stronger organization because you have to sort of storm and norm and then figure out where do you go from here. And some of these things are age-old issues. PD, let me make sure everybody hears, and even though it's late now, our PD is the best in the country. We just have a lot of it, and it's not necessarily strategically targeted toward our goals. I'm not telling you that the PD we've had hasn't been good and hasn't done good and great things in schools, but it hasn't necessarily been systematic. It hasn't necessarily been strategic, and we haven't necessarily measured our ROI on our PD. The funny thing is, I can tell you from leaving here and going somewhere else, when you had a slew of schools in accreditation, when the state came in, they said, what are you spending your PD dollars on, and how are you measuring it? So in schools struggling the most, this is a question that the state is asking. We're not struggling the most, but we need to be asking it, and the study is making us ask these questions as an organization, and the work groups that we have in process are going to, as someone else said, take it to the next level. It's not about that we haven't had great PD. It's going to be more targeted, more strategic, and we're going to be able to monitor the impact of the PD on the outcomes that we're looking for in the strategic plan.
And I think that's great. And I'm thinking about the cultural competency that where we're asking everyone to take that. I would think that I'm going to assume that will help people. I think we can assume that in terms of connecting with all of their students. I don't know how we gauge return on investment on something like that. I'm not sure. I mean, if you can think of a way to do that, that would be lovely. But
I absolutely can. Remember the Hattie work that we just did over the last week with that thing? It had building relationships was
correct.
like the, we've got to be able to say, did the cultural competency, and it's 9:30, but the cultural competency, we gave folks a PowerPoint, right? We have 2 people in an organization with 40,000 employees, and they gave a PowerPoint. That's not going, it's a start. It is not going to get us where we need to get, and that's part of what we're working on now, how to really figure out the right methodology, the delivery, Yes, we've got an awareness now of the word, what it means, but how to put it into practice in schools is a different animal. So it's a beginning. The great thing is, though, Fairfax, when it focuses on something, and I'm not going to, well, I am. I'm going to repeat a Project Momentum. We focused on something and we got it. When we focus on PD, making it strategic, targeted, we're going to be able to do it. And I think we're going to have tremendous outcomes, and we're going to have teachers excited about PD. And it is a balance. You've got to have some common structure from which we're all able to talk on the same page. But yes, I do agree. Teachers' favorite PD is when they have choice, when they have it tailored to their specific needs. And we've really got to dive into these needs assessments we just concluded, where we brought that in, and then have people who are developing it also be our stakeholders, so that they can field test or test for us, hey, this is good, this is not good. And I did that as a school principal after every PD. Hey, was this good? Was it not? What I didn't necessarily do is then go in the classroom to check of what we did. Was there evidence in the classroom that happened? So that, I think, is going to be part of our work to come about what's the right measure to be able to show you that we see classroom changes that then will impact student outcomes. And the closer we can link it, the more effective people are going to see as PD. It's been one of the things that's been cut in the budget over the last couple of years, and I don't think it's helped us.
And I think that's what we're all saying, or at least those of us who have spoken, that getting that bang for the buck and being strategic is, rather than, the different ice cream sundaes, which actually sent me to get a cookie. I'm talking about ice cream sundaes. But the 56 million, and I know you're saying that that's only 2-something%. Did we compare with jurisdictions of the same size as far as what other jurisdictions similar to us are doing? I mean, I would think that might be a different animal.
The 4 to 7% primarily has come from the research done by Alan Auden. So he has used the framework to study a variety of different school systems, from small school systems to larger suburban school systems. So the 4 to 7 benchmark is the benchmark for suburban school systems. Most school systems do not implement this framework on their own. It's pretty labor intensive to do that. So we couldn't then approach Montgomery County and say, dig into your finances. Now, we intend to do some comparisons with them, but
that would be interesting to know, how they handle this. I mean, 56 million is certainly nothing to sneeze at. So we do, and I noticed that you mentioned in here trying to make it so we don't have substitutes having to go into the classroom. And I think that that's important for a number of reasons. It's important both financially to not have to hire substitutes, but also because, children need to have their classroom teacher in front of them as much as possible. And of course, we've separately dealt with the issue of how many substitutes we use and how much we spend on that. So I'm glad to see that part of your focus is to be looking at that issue too. And that's all I'm going to say. So thank you so much.
Might I offer another data point from the needs assessment, in that our support employees are really craving professional development. They feel that there has been a gap in professional development that they can access. They don't feel like they have the same opportunities to grow. And not only in the needs assessment, but also through our support employee associations, we have received very specific feedback around their desire to grow within their positions through PD.
And I'll piggyback on what Kathleen just said on the needs assessment side. The survey that we did with recipients of professional development, we found that they also were generally less satisfied with the professional development that they were receiving. So both the study and the needs assessment heard the same kind of thing about operational staff.
Ms. Kovacs, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think when we started preparing for this work session, you're like, well, it's not all shiny. And I think sometimes that's hard. It's hard to take something you work so hard at and look introspectively and say, we're working really hard and we're doing some really good things, but we need to make improvements. So I really do appreciate you bringing this forward. I appreciate all the dialogue we've had tonight. I support the recommendations and, look forward to going forward with all of this. And thank you for being here at this very late hour. We do appreciate your time.
So I am the last to speak, and I'm kind of sorry I will be the last one because this one was a tough one for me, Dr. Brabrand, and I think maybe Ms. Koufax saying that the value is the introspection, and so the things I'm going to say are hopefully constructive input. First of all, as I shared during our pre-meeting conversation, bullet number 2 under the summary key points and findings, where Ms. Evans brought up the $55.8 million, I really pushed back on that number because a large part of it, I believe the $28 million, has to do with what we are paying our teachers on their as part of their 194-day contracts. So unless we're going to suddenly shorten teacher contracts, of that $55 million, 28 are part of our budget to just pay for our 10-month contract teachers. So I felt that was not necessarily the most accurate capturing of what we're spending in professional development, and that figure kind of was unsettling to me. The second thing is that the notation that the next bullet down, that we spend 13 times more on professional development for our instructional staff members than the operational staff. Again, when we look at our strategic mission, which is K-12 instruction, unless we can look at other school divisions and benchmark, and this is one of the things we talked about with staff, I don't have any context at all of what 13 times means. And I do think that we have an opportunity to look at other school divisions, even if they can't give us their budget numbers. We can look at how many teacher workdays, staff development workdays does Montgomery County have? Does Loudoun County have? Does Prince William? I mean, there are ways to get this data that is not hard at all. I could practically spend 2 hours going on the website and pulling up the calendars at these various school divisions. And I think that is an important number, because families have also said to us, how come my kid starts, first it used to be right after Labor Day, now it's before Labor Day, but we're still only getting out at this time, and other school divisions get out sooner. And part of it is because we sprinkle in a lot of teacher work days and professional development days in the calendar year. And they're great breaks for kids, but families and kids need to realize, when I was coming through the public school system in California, I started the day after Labor Day, and I was out a whole lot sooner, but I had nowhere near the number of days off sprinkled around this calendar year. So it's definitely something that's changed since I came through. So those bullet points, they were very worrisome to me in terms of the board and you and leadership team having, I think, a more accurate assessment of what we're doing in spending in professional development. We certainly know that as the 10th largest school system, that number of 2.2% of our operating budget, again, economies of scale does play a role in it. But one of the things I would just very much ask is that you and staff be very careful before there's any realignment of that 13-1 on our instructional staff to other staff. That needs to be benchmarked into, again, not just what other school divisions do, but what's a best practice model. I'm very sensitive that we want all of our employees, in whatever role they serve, and support employees and everyone, to feel part of the Fairfax County family and the mission. But there are school divisions that have started to outsource a lot of the support services because you have to be able to focus on your mission. So we may not be able to do all of the professional development that we'd like to do in what looks like an equitable way to support positions, because our key focus is we don't professionally develop our teachers first in the classroom. We are going to shortchange our kids. That's just the bottom line. So I think we have to be mindful in that conversation. In terms of looking at, how we make it meaningful. I received input from one of our presidents of the largest teacher association, and he was saying, teacher leaders, we love to talk about our teacher leaders in our buildings, but how we grow their leadership to move beyond, if they want to move into administration, but how we connect them to the professional development is they're wanting to also be truly part of the development of what is the professional development needed in those buildings. And so the advocacy, when we talked about the work groups, I really hope that as we put them together, a focus is so much about asking our principals, who are your most dynamic leaders, that the buzz in the building is this person's a rock star. And, getting them on your work group to say, how do you then make really meaningful professional development? I wanted to make sure that I got that point in there. And then just my final note, in terms of that 4 to 7% benchmark, as I shared with staff, I'm always about data and helping it inform our work, meaningful data, and I think comparing ourselves against high-performing, large school divisions is meaningful. I personally do not believe we should be comparing ourselves against other large private sector organizations. That's not who we are. That's not the space we're in. We can never necessarily do what Lockheed Martin and Verizon does. It's just we're a publicly funded entity. So those kind of benchmark percentages where it kind of looks like, see, we could be spending more. As a school board member, I'm more comfortable in the space of what are our peer competitive school divisions doing. And I will just close in saying I appreciate that when our pre-recession operations were here in Fairfax County, as a government and as a system, we could do things like teacher tuition reimbursements and things like that. I mean, meaningful stuff. Post-recession, we will be struggling. And so making sure that our professional development is, again, to your 3 E's. It's got to be effective and efficient and excellence and equity. That's all. That's the key. Doing as much as we can with what limited we have. And so I guess I would just echo kind of what my staff would say. My school board members were saying to staff. Always your hard work and analysis is valued, but even Jack Dale used to joke that sometimes the Fairfax way was overcomplicate things. So whatever we can do to sort of look at it, what's our main goal here? And I think it is to create dynamic, exciting teachers in the delivery of instruction. And then because I believe so much in research and best practice, I do want that professional development for our operational staff that's in central administration. If you're not getting the professional development you need, then you can't bring that best information to our schools on the front lines. But I do think that the one final note I did make to staff that I want to share with you, and Marty, you did a great job of bringing it to my attention. So the premier workforce in our strategic plan in Ignite talks about wanting to make sure professional development for all of our employees. And the marching orders on something that vague, that lofty, that sort of, esoteric might lead staff to do something that we didn't intend for you to do. So as one humble voice of 12, I will say, that is lofty and that's the ideal. But in the end, I do not want that to be translated to we're going to pull away instructional professional development because we need to find dollars to develop everybody in operations and support, because that isn't what I think our colleagues meant. That's our goal, but in the end, if you have to strategically decide where your dollars go, instructional staff first.
Understood.
And with that, Ms. Mulberg, do we have any next steps? No. So at this point, we are concluded. We did go 45 minutes over, but I think it was a really good work session. Thank you, everybody.